للرحمن من تفاوت فارجع البصر هل ترى من فطور ثم ارجع البصر كرتين ينقلب إليك البصر خاسئا وهو حسير صدق الله العظيم.
Blessed is he in whose hand is dominion, and he is over all things competent. He who created death and life to test you, as to which of you is best indeed. And he is the exalted in might, the forgiving. And he who created seven heavens in layers. You do not see in the creation of the most merciful any inconsistency. So return your vision to the sky. Do you see any breaks? Then return your vision twice again. Your vision will return to your humble, while it speaks they heed. The title of today's talk, as you all would know, is The Purpose of Life, and it forms part of the week-long initiative of Explore Islam Week launched by the Cambridge University Islamic Society. Today's speaker is Brother Hamza Tzortzis, who will talk for 1 hour followed by a brief question and answer session. So without further ado, I introduce Brother Hamza.
To proceed, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, friends, people, I greet you with the warmest Islamic greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. For those who do not know what that means, it actually means, may the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. Today's topic is about the purpose of life. And when I think about the purpose of life, I think about meaning and value. Because I don't really want to regurgitate what we hear in the media, or on the news, or on YouTube, or at our reading sessions at university. I really want to show that essentially without an ultimate objective purpose, we truly do not have true meaning and true value. Now, what do I mean by this? I know this sounds very controversial, but I want you to really understand what I'm trying to say. In absence of a divine purpose, an objective purpose, in absence of an ultimate purpose, ultimately, can we claim that we have any true or ultimate meaning with an objective value? Can we claim that our lives have an objective value? And this is very critical, because if we understand this emotional context now, it would really launch us into a more philosophical investigation about our whole entire lives. Why am I? Whose am I? For whom am I? Where am I for some of us? Okay? So it would help us answer these questions. So what is Mr. Hamza trying to say about meaning and value? Well, who's heard of Nietzsche? Nietzsche? Good, many of us. Now, I was recently discussing with a scholar on Nietzsche. His name is Professor James from Birkbeck University. He's also a colleague of many philosophers at the New College. And he opened a new avenue for me concerning Nietzsche. Because typically in the popular culture, people think Nietzsche is this nihilist. Okay? Might is right. If you have the power, then you can lay down the moral law and the moral values. And the one with the most power has the say. Now, that's obviously a misrepresentation of Nietzschean philosophy. That's a misrepresentation of his views. Now, the reason I'm mentioning Nietzsche, because Nietzsche, he's actually saying what I'm saying now. And if we really read his works, he was very prophetic. He actually made a prophecy 200 years down the line and said, Europe will understand that when we take the divine away from our affairs, not only politically but philosophically, God is dead, the famous Nietzschean narrative, God is dead. There's another joke actually, when Nietzsche died, God said, Nietzsche is dead. That was a joke. But the point is, Nietzsche was basically saying that you take good outside, of the picture, divine purpose outside of the picture. We're going to delude ourselves for a while, and we're going to think, oh, we still have ultimate value and this sense of purpose and this sense of goals and, human values. Hence you have this emergence of humanist associations and groups emerging throughout the West, Australia, America, Europe. So we're having this sense of, trying to reclaim this religiosity but without the divine. But Nietzsche was saying philosophically this is absurd. Because if you take him out, there is no arbiter, there is no reference point, there's no conceptual anchor that transcends human subjectivity. And he said in this situation, what's going to happen is that we're going to realize that everything is meaningless. We're going to be in a state of meaninglessness. And then he said, at this point, at this critical point in our culture, we will then have to make ourselves God. We will have to be God. We will have to tell people what values are and talk about them in an objective and profound sense. But then he raises a contention, Nietzsche. It's a very interesting one. He says, what if we conflict? What if my values are different from your values? And Nietzsche answered in the following way. He said, you know what? I have my values. What are yours? Meaning, I'm confident with mine, let's have a discussion. Now this whole Nietzsche narrative, if we're really attentive to what he's saying, is quite profound because as an atheist, of course, he was also an existential philosopher. He's highlighting the fact that without the divine, there is no meaning. There is no true ultimate meaning. Because I want you to think about this. And I don't want you to think about him some kind of, what he's saying, the typical preacher guy, he's basically saying, you don't have God, you're nobody. I'm not saying that. I value you whether you have a divine or not, whether you believe in a religion or not. It's got nothing to do with this. This is purely conceptual. Okay? Let's move the emotions to one side. If the divine does not exist, and we don't have a sense of divine purpose, then can we claim an ultimate value? Can we? I don't think we can, because say for example, I'm studying at Cambridge, I'm doing medicine, and I spent my whole life trying to find the cure to cancer. Or I become a politician, I spend years, fighting for world peace. At the end of the day, what value does that have if I'm just going to become worm buffet? I mean, think about it. Think about it from, kind of the helicopter approach perspective, yeah? You're in a helicopter, you're just looking at your whole life. I mean, what's the big deal? They're just, my life is just an accumulation of a manifestation of my own ego. Really? Well, does it make any difference? What value does my life have? If there is no ultimate value. Then you may claim, you could give value to yourself. That's true. But that's a subject to yourself. And therefore, it remains highly subjective. Take, for example, meaning. The meaning to our own lives. I mean, why do we even have things like objective meaning when it comes to, for example, social norms, or taboos, or things that we have to do, the sense of ought? These things are important and we give them true meaning because somehow the language we've developed when it comes to meaning and value and even morality transcends the individual self. As Professor Ian Markham, he's a theologian and a philosopher, he actually makes this point. He says, our moral language, it transcends the individual, transcends this subjective understanding of what should be and what shouldn't be. So I want you to really think about this. I want you to think about, if there is no ultimate purpose in our lives, come from the divine, then yes, it's actually true that everything is subjective. Regardless if there is a consensus on some issues. Because what is consensus? It's still subjective. It's a subjective individual plus another subjective individual plus another subjective individual, which is equal to 3 subjective individuals. So you're not going to get anything objective or anything of ultimate value. Now you may argue like Jean-Paul Sartre did when he wrote about on nothingness. And what did Jean-Paul Sartre say? He said, yes, everything is meaningless and no value. Everything is empty. Everything is zero. But from this space of zero, this space of meaninglessness, it actually allows you to recreate yourself and you give yourself meaning. Which is fair enough, and that may happen, and it does happen. But for me there's a problem. It's almost like a self-delusion. because it's equivalent of saying, let's pretend to have purpose, or let's pretend to have meaning. Because ultimately things are meaningless, so therefore give meaning to yourself, recreate your life, but yet the very basis for that life is zero. For me, that's an existential self-delusion. It's self-delusion for me. So I would argue, before we even articulate a positive case that there is purpose in life, I would argue it's an important question. Because it gives us meaning. Because many times when I speak to neo-atheists or atheists or agnostics or fellow religionists or whatever the case may be, you always get this kind of sense of feeling that people are saying, oh, just get on with your life. Forget this purpose question. Okay, as if it's been answered. Or as if there are public spaces in the public sphere to really articulate a positive case for either side. And there isn't. And you see this. Just watch Channel 4. I mean, what did Richard Dawkins do just a year ago? He went to some school kids, in different faith schools, talking about evolution and teaching the kids that, what you believe is wrong, you should believe in me, whatever, right? But, you could tell even from a media narrative, it creates a social construct that anything opposing what we think is rationality in science, or what we think is, the way forward for life, anything opposing that should just be belittled. And you see this, it creates actually emotional connotations in our own hearts, and it's very dangerous, because it creates a dangerous narrative. A very dangerous narrative. It means that someone can't walk into a public sphere and have a positive discussion. I mean, even Professor James was saying to me, and he's an atheist, okay? But he's a true philosopher, because he says, this narrative is wrong. It's wrong. Because we can't have a nuanced discussion. It creates all these kind of social constructive barriers and boundaries that we always hit against a brick wall. So this is why we have to answer this question, I think, because it gives meaning and value to our lives. Also, I want you to think about something else. By the way, I'm just throwing random ideas for you to think, okay? Because I'm not here to preach. You're far more superior than me. I didn't go to Cambridge. I went to Westminster. Yeah? I did psychology there. So the point is, I'm not here to try to teach you something. I actually feel like a forward actually talking to you sometimes. Because, I'm not anyone special. I just want to deliver some ideas to you. I want to have this kind of positive conversation and interaction, because I think planting seeds are better than giving trees. Yeah, it doesn't rhyme, it's not poetic. But the point I'm trying to say is, I want to plant seeds in your mind so you can think further. And if you develop something, then that's objective met. I don't want me to say, hey, I'm right, you're wrong, because I think that's the wrong approach. So in light of that, I want to just, before I continue with the main crux of my discussion, I really want you to turn off your radios. I'm hearing so many radios in the background. Okay? Now what does that mean? Obviously you weren't rude enough to bring a radio to the room. But it's in your mind. It's this internal radio that always speaks and passes judgments when someone's speaking. It happens all the time. Like, for example, I don't know, what would you judge about me when I stood up? I heard he's Greek. That's impossible, he looks Pakistani. Yeah? I am Greek, by the way, yeah? So that would be a radio speaking, yeah? I saw him on YouTube a few weeks ago. He was much fatter. What's happened to him? Is he alright? Yeah? I don't know. He's using all these words. Does he really know what he's talking about? Yeah, that's one. Yeah? Do you see? That's the internal radio, and it always plays. And you know what? It's a human thing. Don't worry about that. It's a human thing. Now, I just want you to learn to switch it off consciously, because if we learn to switch it off, we can connect with each other in such a profound way. Let me give you an example. I give a lot of courses to Muslims on how to articulate a positive case for their tradition to the wider society. And I always ask them this question. I say to them, right, everybody, I'm going to give you one word. I want you to give me some emotional words, connotations, things that you feel about this word. And I say, right, atheist. And you have many hands. If people put their legs up, yeah? And you hear arrogant, cold, fuel for the hellfire, disillusion, illusory, rejecting the truth. You have all these buzzwords, right? I'm like, oh my god, yeah. And then I switch the discussion and say, okay, right, let me do another one. I give you another word. Muslim. said, imagine everyone was non-Muslim in the room. What words do you think you'd hear? You might hear, and I've done this before with non-Muslims, terrorist, backward, regressive, Arab, smelly. Yeah? You have all these words, right? And I said to them, look what you've done. We're both wrong. We're both wrong. Pugnacious attitude. You accuse the other community of having a negative attitude, but you have the same attitude when you're talking about another community. And I'm trying to make them realize this, that so when you're articulating something to someone, when you're trying to engage with another human being, who are you engaging with? The judgment or the person? It's the judgment. So when someone comes to, I don't know, say you have a booth in the Islamic Awareness Week at Cambridge, and there's an atheist that comes on and says, hi, my name is John, and I'm the head of the Atheist and Humanist Association of Cambridge. Now you hearing that, what are you going to say? Cold, arrogant, fuel for the fire. All that's going to come to your head, right? But if you allow that to happen, that radio to play, who are you connecting with? John? Is it George or George I said? George. Are you going to be connecting with George or your judgment of George? You're going to be connecting with the judgment, right? So all human beings have to do is take a snapshot of themselves and drop it. Drop that judgment and turn off the radio. The reason I mention this sometimes at talks is because if you learn to do this now, take a snapshot and really treat me as a blank canvas and I treat you as a blank canvas, I think we will have a positive discussion on a very important topic. Sounds like a deal? Deal? Do you have a truce, white flags? Yeah? Good, excellent. So we talked about meaning and value and its importance if we have this sense, this intuitive sense of an objective value and an objective meaning in our lives, then it probably makes sense that there must be something that transcends our human subjectivity. Fair enough. But I want to take it from an existential route, meaning what does it mean to exist? Because I think this is powerful as well from a purpose of life perspective. An American writer once wrote that your birth, my birth, everybody's birth in this room was like being born and then being sold into slavery. So our birth was like being born, then being sold into slavery. And this writer had a profound point. Why? Because, for example, you never chose to be Asian. I'm assuming you're Asian. Yeah, you're Asian? A bit, okay. Someone who's very confident about the background. So, you're Asian, right? So, he never chose to be Asian. He never chose to be a white man. Okay? Well, unless you have a lot of money these days, you can have that choice. That's a different discussion, yeah? The point is, you didn't choose these things. You didn't choose to be female. You didn't choose to be from Cambridge. You didn't choose your parents. You didn't choose to have the socio-economic background. I never chose to be Greek-looking Pakistani. Yeah? I had none of these choices. I didn't choose these things. So in essence, I'm enslaved to my context. And this is so true. So when we analyze this thinking further, then actually the human being is always in a state of slavery. Now if you define slavery to mean you have no choice, or you're referring to, or using the situation or yourself as a reference point. So if we define slavery like that, then we're all slaves. We're all slaves and we will never be free. Even when we have the illusion of freedom. Because you didn't choose your parents. You didn't choose the essential things that make you who you are at the moment. You had absolutely no choice. You wasn't born with this special, computer equipment on your hand and you could say, right, I want that mom and that dad and, you didn't have this choice. You didn't even choose your own DNA. And you say you're free? I mean, I don't think that works. This is why the existential philosophers like Heidegger and Kierkegaard, they had an amazing point. They talked about this concept called thrownness. That the human being is just thrown into reality. You're just like, there you go, whoever it was, there you go. You're in this pit, this socio-economic biological pit. Get over your life, live your life, die, whatever. You had no choice, right? However, the choices we have is how to react to this context. But let's continue the slavery argument. So we're enslaved to our context, social, biological. But also we're enslaved to our own desires, right? Our carnal, the bestial aspects of man. Many of us are. Sometimes many of us just just walk around like animals, like a very famous 11th century theologian and philosopher of the Islamic tradition, Al-Ghazali. He wrote a book, The Alchemy of Happiness, and he basically says, like, you think you know who you are? You know, when you're hungry, you eat. When you're thirsty, you drink. When whatever, he talked about making love. I don't know if it was appropriate in this audience, but the point is, you know, you just react to your instincts. But is that really you? Is that who you are? Well, if that's the case, you're no different from an animal. Actually, you're probably worse than an animal, because I've been studying gorillas lately, right? What amazing creatures. Yeah, I am telling you something. You know the Quranic discourse, the book of the Muslims, it says to look at communities, animal communities. So the Quran says, look, we've made animals in their own community, so reflect upon that. That's for people who reflect. So when you reflect on the gorilla community, you will learn compassion from them. I am telling you. Just go on YouTube. David Attenborough gorillas. They're very compassionate animals. Anyway, so the point is, you know, he raised that point. Who are you? Are you just a reaction to your carnal, egotistical desires? That's a form of slavery. Now, the other form of slavery we haven't touched upon is the social norm. So there's the context in terms of your birth, your socio-economic reality. There's your carnal desires and your ego, and then there's the social construct or the social norm. Because we are social animals, and we react to this. I mean, if you study social psychology or social constructionism, you see that we are a product of our environment to a certain degree. Maybe not 50-50, but there is a huge percentage that we are just enslaved to the social norm or the social construct. I mean, how many of us think about the way we look? Many of us, I do. Yeah. I mean, I don't have the best dress sense, but the point is, I do. We all think about the way we dress, the way we look and dress. But in that thinking, what are we thinking? Some of us are thinking, what will other people see? What will other people think? You know, you always have these adverts. L'Oreal, because I'm worth it. Yeah? Now, I'm not saying that's wrong, I'm not condemning that. But what I'm trying to say is, it's part of a social construct that you sit in, that you insert yourself in to make decisions about your behavior in your life. Because if you study the development of a social norm, it happens because human beings require certainty. So you're thinking, oh, what shall I wear? Yeah? And you're thinking, shall I wear this or that? Am I going to look nice? What is John going to say? Yeah? And if you have those doubts, you know, you're going to insert your social conscious or your mind or your subconscious into the social norm. What did Kim Kardashian wear? Or what's the other girl's name with nice hair? What's her name? You married a football player, you cheat on her. Yeah, Cheryl Cole. Yeah. You know, by the way, her hair was fake, but yeah, that was fake today. So, how do I know this stuff? I used to be on trains all the time, and you know, you come back really late, there's all these magazines around, you just bored, so you just read. Anyways, mind trash. But the point is, maybe I'll buy her product or wear the blouse that she wore. You know, I know it's a crude example, but it's true. Now, we could use this for many, many different things. There are many studies in psychology, for example, you have 10 professors on the table. You draw 2 lines on the board. One line is obviously shorter than the other, but if 9 professors were told to say the shorter one is longer than the longer one, the professor, who was a participant, he would actually say, yeah, you might be right. That's the effect of the social norm. And we know these studies, the Milgram experiment, the Zimbardo experiment. If, for example, you read Zimbardo's new book, Philip Zimbardo, he's an emeritus professor, I believe, in psychology. He wrote the book, The Lucifer Effect. You know, why do good people do bad things, for example? And he talked about systemic influences, because before we had this thing that, oh, there's an evil in you and there's a good in you and you could bring it out. But rather, he said, no, actually, it's zero, it's normative, there is no good or evil, it's just you as a product of the systemic effects of a particular society. Yeah? So the issue I'm trying to raise here is that, the social construct and norm shapes who we are. Now there's an interesting book by Lillian Berg called Social Constructionism, published by Routledge. And she wrote a book called Social Constructionism, and she said, even language affects the way we behave and think. And she uses the word love. Now, if I were to ask, I don't know, who looks lovely? You look lovely. Your glasses, you see. What does love mean for you?
Caring for someone.
Caring for someone, okay, good. Anyone else? Anyone more poetic, maybe? No? Okay, good. You know, I asked a bloke this in Brighton just a few weeks ago, and he said commitment. Look at that for a bloke, huh? You never hear that from a bloke saying, love is commitment, yeah? You have this stereotype about blokes that they will never say such a thing. Yeah? Okay, so it's caring. Now, generally speaking, you know, Vivian Bell was basically discussing that this word love is not a behavior anymore, it's an internal feeling. I love you, I care for you, but I really love you though. You know, if you read about domestic violence abuse, you basically see many of the men who abuse their wives, they would say, but I love her really. So it's just an internal feeling. But 200-300 years ago, if you were to study society, it's a behavior. Come here darling, let me love you for a bit. Even my grandmother, what she would say to me in Greek, come here so I can love you for a bit. It's a moment, it's a behavior, it's an action, it's not just an internal feeling. Do you see? And this is very important, that even language, the connotation to words that we use, whether it's external, internal, manifested or non-manifest, or whatever the case may be, creates that social norm. And she also quotes economics and capitalism. She says, for example, in capitalist societies, generally you have people on the personality scale that tend towards more competition or more individualism. And that's why when they did the study, you'd have, for example, like a line down the globe. The West is more individualistic and the East is more communitarian, per se. I know it's crude, but you're getting the point. It has to do with the systemic effects or the social constructs. And social constructs are what? Influential constructs. Whether it's the media, politicians, people in power, the tribesmen, whatever the case may be. It's people and things of influence. So we're enslaved to our social construct. From that perspective, if all this social stuff is true, then we're all slaves. We're slaves, regardless we live in the free world or not. So what are we going to do? We're all slaves, people. We're just biological, social constructed robots. That's it. DNA in, social norms in, context in, and you have you. With a sense of illusory freedom. Oh, it was my choice. Really? Think about that. Think about it for a while. However, I think there is a way out from this slavery. And let me now articulate a case for the Islamic tradition. Now, in the Islamic spiritual tradition, we have this word called ruh. Ruh. This word ruh actually means the soul, the spirit, the self, the consciousness. And etymologically, it's related to the word raha. Raha. Now, raha means like tranquility or liberty. So, in a way, the ruh, the soul, wants to achieve that freedom, that liberty. And according to the Islamic spiritual tradition, especially in the words of Ibn Qayyim, the 14th century theologian, he said that the only way to free yourself from the shackles of yourself, your ego, your carnal desires, as the Qur'an, the book of the Muslim says, have you not seen the one who takes his own ego as his Lord, as his God? The only way to remove the shackles of your own carnal desires and ego, to remove the shackles from social pressure and the social construct and norm, and even the shackles of your social biological context, is to change your slavery. To enslave yourself to the divine reality, which he called Budiyya, the servanthood to the divine. And that is the only way to truly emancipate, free, liberate yourself from the shackles of your ego, the shackles of the limited nature of the self, the shackles of the social construct, and the shackles of social biological conditioning. That's the Islamic view. And this leads to the concept of worship in Islam, because the answer to the purpose of life is in what we believe in the Quranic narrative, the book of the Muslims, which God says what? I haven't created the beings with free choice, humans and other beings in the spirit world. I haven't created these beings إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, except to worship the divine. That's your raison d'être. That's your reason for existence. But look what it does. It frees you from the ephemeral nature of yourself, of your ego, of social pressure, and your context. So, enslaving yourself or having a servanthood to the divine that transcends all these things is liberation. This is why, you may see some Muslim women who cover their hair or their face. And this is, I'm going to use the Muslim woman as an easy example because she's always using the media. This is why I think Muslims should change the narrative when they're talking about manifestations of the tradition. Because sometimes what do we say? Yeah, I'm wearing the scarf because it's my freedom. Yeah? Which may be true, essentially, because it was your free choice to accept the religious narrative and to accept that this is a command of God and therefore it's from your free choice, that's fine. But in reality, from an existential perspective, what does it mean to exist? It's got nothing to do with freedom. It's actually got to do with elevation. And I'm going to explain why. Imagine if a Muslim woman would be on the media and there'll be like this whole big debate again in France when they're covering their face. It's banned, you can't cover your face in France. Yeah? In France, there's a whole debate in the public square, you can't cover your face or whether hijab or something, the veil. Now, if the narrative was, wait a minute, this is a positive manifestation because you're the one who's really enslaved, because this is a symbol of me being liberated from the shackles of what society expects from me, what even my husband expects from me, what even a man expects from me, what even L'Oreal or the other brands expect from me, what even I expect of myself, my limited nature, my limited egotistical desires and carnal desires. I'm transcending this by changing my reference point and changing my obedience or changing my enslavement to the one that deserves to be worshipped because he made all of this. That's a far more liberating narrative in my view, rather than jumping in the neoliberal narrative, oh, because it's my freedom. It doesn't really articulate why you're doing it. It doesn't really articulate because the real reason is it's a command of God. Why are you obeying the command of God? Because it's from God. There you go. And it transcends me. It transcends social pressure. It transcends all of these things. Now, I know up to now what I'm saying is relatively coherent. It makes sense. If, there is a big if, because I like thinking like an atheist. Because it's open-minded. And the if is, well, Mr. Hamza, you're basing it on the fact that there is a God. And that this book that you call the Quranic narrative, or a posh way of saying the book or the Qur'an, is true. That's a big if, right? But you know what? If I could verify that if, then we could start thinking, right? So I think we should verify that if, or give you questions. So if what I'm saying is coherent, but it's based upon these two assumptions that divine is true and that the Quranic discourse is from the divine, this is a true basis, then therefore what I'm saying has implications. So how can now we articulate a case to say, yes, our purpose is to worship the divine reality? And by the way, in the Islamic spiritual tradition, worshipping the divine doesn't mean just headbutting the floor 5 times a day. Yeah? It's more than that. It's smiling, it's being good to your mother, it's massaging the feet of your wife, it's feeding the poor, the neighbor, Muslim and non-Muslim, removing obstacles from the road, being patient at a time of calamity. Yeah? So many, it's wide. Worship is like a worldview. It's everything. Even there are actions of the heart, we believe in Islamic spiritual tradition, that basically, our intentionality is part of worship. Are we doing it just for our ego, for the divine? So there's it opens a whole avenue of spirituality, which obviously not part of today's topic, but the point is, worship is not just like, an action. Because even in Islamic prayer, it's not just action, it's the intention. It's what we call khushu'. Khushu' meaning this humbleness and brokenness and the love of the heart yearning for the divine. Do you see? This is all important spiritual stuff. We're not just there doing mechanical stuff, as if, we're like mechanical robots, Many of us act like that, many Muslims do, don't they? I call them Islamo men, yeah? I'm an Islamo man, or an Islamic Dalek. Have you seen Doctor Who? Take me to your mosque, yeah? We're like that sometimes. It's the way we go and the way we just go the right motions and that's it, it's a perfect guy. And this is the issue of the problem of the Muslim community in the West, because we haven't taken a classical tradition and revived it. Because the classical tradition, which is based on authentic sources, is not just about externality, it's about the internal as well. And you bring them both together to have the true Islamic shakhsiyya, which means the true Islamic personality, which is the internal and the external. Take modesty, for example. You have a woman who may say, I cover my hair because it's modest. Yeah? That's not actually true. It's a part of the Islamic conception of modesty, but it's not the full part, because you could have women who even cover their face and the behaviors are very modest at all. I've had this happen to me so many times. You're like, covering everything and, oh, you're right, Hamza, really nice hair. Like, oh, man, what's this? Do you see? It's not a very modest way of dealing with yourself, especially in the Islamic tradition as a woman. Then you have another woman who just dressed with jeans and a shirt, she may be showing a bit of skin, and she'll have a modest approach to life, and she'll have no ego, and she'll be able to, really speak to you in a way that's modest, and you just feel this modest warmth about her, right? Now in the Islamic tradition, they're both right and they're both wrong. The first one's right in terms of the way she looked, but wrong in terms of the way she behaved and her heart and intentions. The second one is right in the way she behaved, but not necessarily right in the way she looked. Now it's not just one or the other, it's both. And that's why some people, especially in the non-Muslim community, they look at something thinking, it says do's and don'ts. Go grow this dead protein on your head, look like a goat, goats and bears, right? Yeah? I mean, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't. It absolutely doesn't mean anything. It only means something when it's here, when you're doing it as an act of love for the Prophet upon him be peace, or as an act of obedience, or whatever the case may be. It's both. It has to be both. This one is Islamic tradition. We shouldn't really judge anyone. In our pious predecessors, the early generation, one man would ask another man, why don't you ever speak about anybody? And he would basically say, I'm not satisfied with myself. Why would I speak about anybody else? Yeah? Anyway, I don't know how to go to this topic, but the point is, now, if everything I was saying was relatively coherent, it's based upon the two assumptions that God exists and the Qur'an is from the divine reality. And if that's true, therefore, what I've said about purpose, that we're here to worship the divine, is therefore true. It's just simple logic, yeah? If this is from God, and God said we're here to worship Him, therefore, and it's true, therefore, worshipping Him is true. It's very simple logic. So let me just give you some questions about first the divine reality. Do we have good reasons to believe in divine reality? Well, I think we do. And I think we could start just by looking at the universe. Let's just think about the universe for a bit. This cosmos, this ever-expanding monster, if you like, of mass and matter and other cosmic stuff, yeah? This thing is phenomenal. I mean, just take away religious connotations, just reflecting on it is like, you have a sense of awe, you're inspired, you're like, wow, this is amazing. The reality is when we look at the stars, we always think that we're looking at something external, but in reality, we came from stars. Because the modern kind of approach to cosmology and physics is that the essential elements of stuff came from outer space, came from the stars. I mean, the early stars exploded and we're made from molecules. So when we're looking at the stars, it's like we're looking at ourselves. It's quite interesting. Honestly, you can check this out. It's on YouTube. Not a great reference, but it's just popular science now. It's just well known. Okay, I'll give you that. So let's look at the universe now. If we could show that the universe had a beginning, then it has severe philosophical implications in my view. And I think we can show that the universe had a beginning. And let me just articulate two pieces of evidence to try and justify that. The first piece of evidence is going to be mathematical, philosophical. The second is going to be astrophysical or cosmology. I rely on the first one more. And let's talk about it. Now, if the universe never had a beginning, it implies it's always been there. And that language means, well, therefore it's eternal. And if it's eternal, therefore the past of the universe is infinite. It's just a very simple, logical way of understanding about the past of the universe if it never began. There must be an infinite history of past events. The past goes on forever. Infinitely. But the question is, can we have an infinite of anything in the real world, manifested in the real world? Fine, we know it makes sense in mathematics, and if you study math, based on axioms and conventions, assumptions, the infinite makes sense, it's coherent. But can we export that and throw it into the real world? No, we can't. You know why? Because it leads to paradoxes and absurdities. Let me give you an example. Say I have 5 bottles in this room. At every possible moment, I add another bottle. Bottle number 6, 7, a million, 7 million, a trillion, 7 trillion, and it continues. Am I ever going to reach a number of bottles that we can describe as infinite? No, because we could just do n plus 1s. We could have another one. And this is why Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, he said that infinite is never actualized in the real world. It's just potential. You're always going to have actual finites. You're not going to have an actual infinite. So, from a practical perspective, you can see already the absurdities of an infinite. Also, take the example of having an infinite number of bottles in this room. Let's assume that there's an infinite number of bottles in this room. If I take 5 bottles away, how many bottles do we have left? Infinite, or some logicians say infinity minus 5. But practically, we've taken 5 away from something. That should mean we should be able to count how many bottles are in this room. But we can't. It leads to absurdities and paradoxes. So there's a huge issue here. We can't have an infinite in the real world. Professor James did say to me the other day though, well, take the distance between this table and that piano. When you cross that distance, you've crossed an infinite. And I think he misconstrued between the potential infinite and the actual infinite. Because we can potentially, arbitrarily, split this distance to infinite parts, like Zeno's paradox. Take a distance, then halve it, then halve that distance, then halve that distance. Are you ever going to reach the end? No. It can potentially continue for an infinite number of splitting the distances, if you like. But that's just potential. I can actually traverse this distance, and it's an actual finite. So even from these examples, the infinite is never actualized. So if we apply this to the universe, because the universe is real, and the past of the universe is real, then can the universe have an infinite past? Well, no, from this perspective, because it just cannot ever be. The infinite can never be in the real world. Universe is real, its past is real, therefore its past cannot be infinite, it must be finite. If it's finite, it must have begun. I think that's the strongest evidence to show that the universe began. But there's some supporting evidence in the scientific field. I'm not claiming to be a scientist or astrophysicist, a very layman, amateurish approach to this issue, yeah? But, no one has a monopoly of thinking. The Prophet Muhammad, the Prophet of peace, said that wisdom is the possession of the believer. Wherever he finds it, he should take it. So I'm not claiming to be an authority, but this is my general reading around the subject. And even atheist physicists and theoretical cosmologists say that T is equal to 0. Time began, the universe began. And you've all heard of the Big Bang, right? Yep, Big Bang. Big Bang, very popular term for a whole host of models. Because, as we know, we had observations. Hubble observed these separate variables, distant stars, that they were shifting away. And what they thought was, well, if we rewind the clock, or we just go backwards in time, this shifting, this expanding of the universe, you bring it back together, and they said there must have been a singularity where time, space, and everything began. Now, this was empirical confirmation of the Friedman and Lemaitre model that pre-existed the observations. It was coherent mathematically, and the Friedman-Lemaitre model actually said the universe expanding and there could be a singularity, okay? However, this is not the only model, because this model says, for example, there's not a singularity like a dot. It's like an apex of a cone, okay? You have an apex of a cone, and now modern theoretical physicists say there's a spatial temporal boundary. So space and time began. It's not a single point, it's like an apex of a cone. There are other models like the quantum fluctuation model and other models, but from my limited reading of them, they sound incoherent. Let me give you an example. The quantum fluctuation model says what? That the quantum vacuum pre-existed what we know to be the universe. And this quantum vacuum had random subatomic events with gravity, and they somehow combined, and you have the entire universe. The problem with this is that it assumes the quantum vacuum is eternal. If it's eternal, then all the possible quantum fluctuations must have occurred, which would mean that this universe must have collided with another universe by now. Since it hasn't, then there's a problem with your theoretical model. And the way they argue away from this is, oh, the quantum vacuum is also expanding. But then rewind the clock. So I don't think it's a very, very strong argument to explain the origins of the universe. I would humbly say, and you could do this reading for yourself, the Friedman-Lemaitre model is the most coherent and it's the most damaging philosophically because it says that actually the universe once wasn't and now is. And that has huge philosophical implications. T equals equal to 0, there's a spatial temporal boundary, meaning the universe is like a finite object. It's an expanding finite object. It has a spatial temporal boundary. This has a spatio temporal boundary. So, these evidences show that the universe began. Now, this is the easy part. I know I've baffled you, but this is the really easy part. Okay? So, if we have shown clearly that the universe began with good reasons to believe the universe began, then there are only 4 possible explanations in my humble view. If there are more, we can discuss them in the Q&A. The first option is, well, since the universe began and now it's in existence, it must have been in non-existence. It wasn't there at all. Now, could that be via nothing? Could it not exist and then exist just via nothing or from nothing? That's the first option. Second option, it created itself. Or if we use less religious language, it brought itself into being. Third option, it was created or was brought into being by something else that was created or brought into being. Fourth option, it was created or brought into being by something that wasn't created or brought into being. Let me repeat the options. The universe popped into existence. What are the possible explanations? Well, number 1, it came from or via nothing. Number 2, self-created. Number 3, created by something else created. Or number 4, created by something uncreated. These are the possible logical explanations. So let's assess them together. First point, could the universe come from nothing? Or via nothing? Mathematically, this doesn't make sense. Because, think about it, it would have us to believe that 0 plus 0 plus 0 is equal to 3. Nothing plus nothing plus nothing is equal to 3. 0 plus 0 plus 0 is equal to 3. Because the universe wasn't there at all. If it began, it implies it wasn't. And then it was. How can that happen? How can this state change, if you even want to call it a state change, how can that be via nothing, via absolutely nothing? What we mean by nothing is nothing, not the quantum vacuum, meaning the absence of anything. How can that be? It's equivalent to me saying, you know this ice cube in my hand? It's melting via nothing. You're like, you stupid idiot, go back to Hackney, yeah? That's where I'm from, Hackney, yeah? And it's obviously having a state change because of temperature, via something. And even intuitively it doesn't make sense. I mean, you've watched some magicians on TV before. You know when they have a box, it's empty, they close it, they go abracadabra, and you have a rabbit. And you're not shocked and surprised because out of the empty nothingness, a rabbit appeared. No, you're not saying that. You're saying, and you're confused on how it happened because you know it's a trick. You want to know how he tricked me. Do you see? So it's intuitive. It's not that out of nothing comes. To believe such a thing was like believing in magic. I'm telling you, I've been reading some of these new atheist narrative books, right? And it's no different than magic. It's just couched in sophisticated language. It's no different from hocus pocus. Honestly. It's hocus pocus. If I said to you, I had a box, right? And in this box, there was some dust fluctuations. And in the dust fluctuations, it created my mother. You'd be like, you idiot. Yeah? But that's what we say. In quantum vacuum, we have subatomic events, and they just fluctuate, and then you have the universe. Is it not the same thing, in a way? Maybe it's a crude way of looking at it, but think about that. Anyway, there is a contention. I don't like just preaching to the converted, I like to have a nuanced discussion, and the only contention to this point is the quantum vacuum. Because if you've studied this as basic A-level physics, you know that in the quantum vacuum you have random subatomic events. And the argument here is that these subatomic events appear from nothing and from via no cause. Now there is a problem here. Sometimes in the popular books they say nothing is the quantum vacuum. But that's not what we mean by nothing. We mean the absence of everything, right? Well, what they mean about the nothing is the quantum vacuum. The quantum vacuum is something. Even go to Wikipedia, you find that, go on your iPhone right now, Wikipedia quantum vacuum, and you see quantum vacuum is a sea of fluctuating energy, it's a rich structure, it is something. Yeah? So that's not a valid contention, it's language play. The other contention is, well, actually we have things appearing with no causes. With no causes. Now, there's a wider philosophical approach to this discussion, which I'll entertain at the end, but I would argue to deny causes even on the quantum fluctuation level is to deny your own perceptions. And I use a Kantian argument for that, but we could discuss that in the Q&A. So I don't think there's any valid contention against the first issue. Let's go to the next logical option. It was created by self-created. Well, for it to be self-created, what does it imply? It implies that it was in existence and not existence at the same time, right? It implies it existed and didn't exist at the same time, and this is impossible. Because for something to be self-created, it means it once wasn't there in order to be there, but at the same time when it wasn't there, it was there before it was actually there. Confused? Exactly. It's the equivalent of saying, my mother gave birth to herself. What an ugly thought. Yeah? It's impossible, right? Or, I gave birth to myself. This is an impossibility. Yeah? So we have a philosophical possibility here. So it's normal. But there are two contentions that I've read about and that philosophers have brought to the table. Number one, this was brought by Andrew Compson, who's the head of the British Human Association. I had a discussion with him in Birmingham University. And he said, concerning self-creation, I think you're wrong, sir. I was like, okay, fair enough, I want to hear this. He said, have you studied biology? I said, yep, at A-level, and I did just a bit in university when you study psychology, you do a bit of biology, yeah? Not much, but it's a bit. And he said, okay, well, have you heard of asexual reproduction? So yes, I have. Well, there you go, self-creation. You have single-cell organisms that they self-replicate, asexual reproduction. I couldn't stop laughing. It wasn't out of arrogance, I was laughing because I thought, what a stupid contention. Because his example has justified our point. First and foremost, it's a flawed example because the single-cell organism is already there. The universe wasn't already there. We're talking about how it came to be. That's number one. Number two, for asexual reproduction to happen, what do you require? Energy. From outside of itself. So he's basically saying the universe had something outside of itself for it to appear. Same as saying the powerful divine. So his example is in line with our perspective. So the asexual reproduction is a flawed contention. There's a stronger one. It's by Stephen Hawking. He wrote a book, The Grand Design. The funny thing about this book, in an introduction, he writes, philosophy is dead. And the whole book is full of, don't even say physics. It's his philosophical perspective on physics. He's an indeterminate, for example. So it's, and I believe, is he a realist or anti-realist? I forgot the difference. But he has philosophical assumptions throughout his whole book. So how can he say philosophy is dead? When his book is full of philosophy and philosophical assumptions. That's the irony. What he really meant by that, though, just to be fair to the physicist, and he's obviously infinitely greater mind than I am. I'm not trying to belittle him in any shape or form. But again, no one has an option of thinking, so we're just judging his conclusions. He says because of gravity and the quantum vacuum of subatomic fluctuations, you can have the universe. Do you remember what we spoke about earlier about the quantum fluctuation model, it being incoherent? Well, there's the answer. He has an assumption, and I don't think his assumption is valid. There's nothing wrong with that. His quantum fluctuation assumption is incoherent. All the maths makes sense, and the physics, and everything is fantastic, but the very assumption itself, I think, is incoherent. And I'll discuss that earlier. So, the two contentions of creation is not, I think, strong. Third option. So that was 4 fingers. Third option, okay? What was the third option? Anybody awake? It was created by something else that was also created or brought into being, but something that was also brought into being. But here you have something called the absurdity of the infinite regress. Okay? And what do I mean by that? Well, Ibn Taymiyyah, a classical theologian, he basically said, if that was the case, that the ultimate reason for the universe was just another universe, for example, that was also brought into being, you would never have existence in the first place. Because if this continues ad infinitum, forever, you would never have the universe. Let me give you an example. If I want to shake his brother's hand, but in order to shake his hand, he has to ask permission from the brother next to him. But he also has to ask permission too. If that goes on forever, am I ever going to shake his hand? No. Let me give you another example. Say I'm an American Marine, and I want to shoot an alien from Mars that would come down and would destroy us, okay? And before he shoots the alien, he has to ask permission from the alien, not the alien, from the marine behind him. If that goes on forever, is he ever going to shoot? No. I'll give you another example so it can really stick in your mind. Say there's a whole chain of dominoes and you can't see the end, it's too far, it goes beyond the horizon. But for every domino you see, it's fallen. Right? Chain of dominoes and they're fallen. What does it say about the end of the domino chain? It says that it didn't go back forever, there was a beginning. Something outside of the chain started the process. Otherwise, you never have the fallen domino in the first place. Another example to really stick in your mind. Echo. You walk into this tunnel and you're hearing your name. Hamza, Hamza, Hamza. Well, where did that come from? Are you going to now assume that it has always been that way? The echo's been Hamza, Hamza forever? No. You know, someone actually started off by saying Hamza, and it continues the echo. So the point of these examples is to show the absurdity of infinite regress, and also to show that it could not go on forever, otherwise you would not have that thing in existence in the first place. And I think all the examples I've given show that. So, where are we now? We know it's absurd then to say ultimately the universe cannot be explained by something else that was created. So the fourth option is the most plausible, I would humbly argue. It was created or brought into being by something that wasn't brought into being or wasn't created. And this is interesting because the philosopher Abraham Varghese, in the appendix to Professor Anthony Fleur's book, There Is a God, he basically says that we need to make our minds up. Either the universe was eternal, or what caused the universe is eternal. We're not disagreeing with something being eternal, by the way. So the mass, or matter, or brought matter into existence in the first place. Now, we argue that the thing that caused the universe must be eternal is because matter began. And if it began, it must be a cause. It's just very simple. So, doesn't mean it's God, by the way. That's a bit of a jump. But now we get a bit juicy. There's an uncreated creator. We could have 6 rational attributes from this perspective. Number 1, must be eternal. Because if it's uncaused, it's always been there. Eternal. Number 2, must be powerful. If you split an atom, what happens? Anyone know? This is Cambridge? Yeah. What happens?
Fission.
Yes? A bomb, right? Energy is released. Yeah? It's massive. So the creator of a single atom must be powerful. Okay? Look at the solar flare. One solar flare is equivalent to what? 1,000 Hiroshima bombs? So, eternal, powerful. Number 3, knowing or intelligent. This is very simple. It's an inference, but it's simple. What's in the universe? Laws. Why does this fall on the floor? The law of gravity. So a lawgiver implies an intelligence. Eternal, powerful, knowing or intelligent. 4th point. Transcendent. Why must it be transcendent? Well, this is very simple. I like explaining it this way. Look at this chair. If I were to make this chair, do I become the chair? No. If I'm Bob the Builder and I make this building, do I become part of the building? No. As Ibn Taymiyyah, the classical theologian, said, that the creator is distinct and disjoined from creation. So he's transcendent. The next point, 5, must have a will. If he has a will in Islamic thought or philosophy, it's called irada. Why must he have a will? Very simple. If he's eternal, and he brought into existence something that began, it can only mean that he chose the universe to come into existence. And choice indicates a will, and a will indicates you can have a relation with conscious beings in the universe. Also, the Christian philosopher John Polkinghorne, he makes something, he articulates an interesting point. He says there's 2 types of explanations, scientific and personal. What's the scientific explanation of me drinking water? Or having a burger? I don't know, hormones, synapses, brain working, hungry, I bite, mastication, yeah? Salivary amylase, digest the carbohydrates into simpler sugars. It goes down my throat. What do you have? the longitudinal and circular muscles working is called peristalsis, yeah? It's A-level biology, man. Then it goes down your gut, then you have what? Then it goes to long intestine, you have the villi and the macrovilli, then you have the crypt of lubricum, producing some juices, I think, for fats. You have the lacteal. Who does biology? Nobody? I could be making this up. But this is true, yeah? Go to any biology A-level, yeah? This happens, this is a scientific explanation, okay? Insulin, sugar levels rise, blah, blah, blah. What was the personal explanation? I'm hungry. So for outside of the universe, there's no scientific explanation, so he chose the universe to come into existence. That's another way of looking at it as well, it's quite interesting. So he must have a will. The last one, he must be one. Why are we saying he must be one? He must be one because this is in line with rational thinking. Because there's a rational principle called Occam's razor, which is misapplied a lot. But Occam's razor, in a popular sense, is do not multiply entities beyond necessity. Which is not really true. Really, Occam's razor is the simplest explanation plus the most comprehensive explanation, which means it has greater explanatory scope and explanatory power or force, is the best explanation. So it's simple and it explains more things. It doesn't create more questions than it answers, okay? How does God being one do this? Well, it's very simple. One, or powerful, immaterial, knowing God, or knowing being that's uncreated, created the universe. Simple, and it has great explanatory scope and power. If you say there was two or three, it's ludicrous. Because you're not adding more to the first explanation. You're actually adding more questions. How can two all-powerful beings that are supposed to be distinct from each other actually coexist? That's a question that's unanswered. So according to the Occam's razor, monotheism is rational. So look what we've done. Beginning of the universe, 4 explanations, must be uncreated creator, keep on thinking rationally, must be eternal, transcendent, have a will, powerful, knowing, and is one. That sounds like God to me. Now some people say, well, that's God of the gaps. You don't know any answers, you have no clue, okay? You guys religious fanatics, you just look at the universe, you just dumbfounded, and you just say, God did it, yeah? No, that's actually a cliche. We've looked at the universe, conceptualized, understood the evidence, talked about that it began. If it began, there are certain implications. If there is an uncreated creator, it must have these attributes rationally. Oh, this correlates with the Islamic understanding of the divine. As the Qur'an, the book of the Muslims. Actually, it's not the book of the Muslims. We believe it's a book for humanity, by the way. I don't know why I keep saying that. Yeah? It's for humanity, for our guidance. It's our book, whether we like it or not. Yeah. So our book, the Qur'an, what does it say about God in the 112th chapter? Qul, say. هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. Say, God, He is one, uniquely one. He is eternal, He begets not, nor was He begotten, and there is nothing like unto Him. All of these verses, if you study the exegesis, implies what we've just said. A powerful, knowing God that has a will and is one, and unique and transcendent. So rationally, we can justify God's existence to some degree. In my final 10 minutes, 5 minutes. This leads now to the next part of justifying Islam, which is actually, well, you're just talking about a deist version of God that doesn't interact with the universe. How do you know Islam is true and therefore this purpose of life is true? Well, this leads to revelation. And I think, it requires another lecture in itself, but when we explore the Qur'an, we see something very amazing. Because Western and Eastern scholars have concluded or described the Quranic discourse as a very intrusive and imposing text. It wants to intrude and impose itself on the inner dimensions of man, on his aql, meaning intellect in Arabic, on his nafsiyah, his internal disposition. And how does the Quran achieve this? By asking profound questions. It's a very existential text from that perspective. وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. And in themselves, do they not see? أَوَلَمْ يَتَفَكَّرُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ. Do they not reflect within themselves? أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبْلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ. Have you not seen the camel and how it was created? Talks about all the evidences وَكَذَلِكَ نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. And thus to explain our signs and evidences for those who reflect. يَتَفَكَّرُونَ comes from the Arabic trilingual stem فَكَرَ, which actually means, don't just think about things like you think about things, yeah? It actually means don't be a desert romantic. Don't bask in the sun and touch the sand and write poetry to your lover and drink a glass of milk just to make it Islamic, yeah? Don't do that. Rather, the thinking we're talking about is, what is the implications of the object of meditation? What are the implications of so-and-so? What's the implication of X? What's the implication that I have a conscience, that I have intentionality? What's the implications of love? What's the implications of the beginning of the universe? What are the implications of all of these things? This is what the Qur'an is trying to make you do. Think. That's what it even says. Are you going to follow your forefathers? The social pressure, social construct, daddy and mummy. Are you going to follow them? Even if what they were saying was false. It's quite unique for a 7th century book now. Making you think. That's what the Qur'an tries to do. And this thinking is teleological. These verses are teleological, meaning they're there for a specific end. They're there for you to establish the oneness of the divine reality, that He deserves to be worshipped, not you. Not your teacher, not the Pope, not a stone, not a wall, but the one who created all of this. But the Qur'an goes even further than this. It's not just about thinking. The Qur'an even deals with the doubters. For example, in the 2nd chapter of the Qur'an called the Cow, Surah Baqarah, in the 23rd verse, the Qur'an says, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِمَّا نَزَلْنَا عَلَىٰ عَبْدِنَا فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِثْلِهِ وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. And if you're in doubt, he's talking about the doubters. Wow. It's not preaching to the converted, he's talking to human beings. If you doubt this book, which we have sent down to our servant, referring to the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, then bring one chapter like it, and call on your witnesses and supporters besides God, in kuntum sadiqeen, if you're truthful in your claim. Now, the exegetes, known as the mufassirun in the Arabic language, the exegetes said, this has something to do with the unique literary form of the Arabic language in the Qur'an. Because the Qur'an, according to Western and non-Western linguists and literateurs, they've concluded that the Qur'an is an inimitable and unique text. It has a unique literary form that cannot be imitated. This is key here. The reason it's key because all human expression, if the blueprint exists, for example, this amazing artwork, yeah? If the blueprint exists, you can emulate it. I mean, I was checking on the internet the other day, you can buy replicas of Picasso. Because there's some atheist apologist online saying this argument is false. Look at Shakespeare, he was so great. Or look at Picasso, it can't be imitated. Right? Well, that's not true. There have been imitations all the time. So there are imitations. If you have the tools available, the blueprint available, any human expression can be imitated. The Quranic discourse cannot. This is why Professor Arbuthnot, who was a British Orientalist and Arabist, he said, although several attempts have been made to challenge the Qur'an, because these verses themselves are a challenge, bring something like it, none have yet succeeded. So none have succeeded imitating its unique literary form. Now some may argue, what about Shakespeare? He's unique. No one copied him. Well, that's actually not even true. It's a very popular misunderstanding because Shakespeare, he wrote his plays and other works that he wrote in the trocate meter, in blank verse, in the iambic pentameter. And these meters were used by other English literateurs. So it's not unique from a literary form perspective. Even go to Wikipedia, or even to a normal basic textbook on Shakespeare criticism, you see that Christopher Marlowe has been attributed some of his works. So he's not inimitable from that perspective. But the Quranic discourse, its structural features of the language itself, descopes the Arabic language. Because when you utter in the Arabic language, from a classical sense especially, it's impossible to imitate the Qur'an. And also when you utter in the Arabic language, what happens is that you have your speech categorized in known literary forms. Prose, rhyme prose, you could split rhyme prose into different styles like saj'a and kahin and whatever the case may be. You have a combination of poetry and prose, maqama in the Arabic language. You have the al-bihar, the rhythmical patterns of poetry. You have mursal, which is straightforward speech. Now I don't want to get involved in technicalities, people vastly, but the point is, it de-scopes all of these literary forms. And no one has been able to imitate it. Now some people may say, well, this is a subjective argument. No, it's not, because it's not about the aesthetic reception of the language. Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? It's not about how nice that sounds to you. It's rather how it's couched in observable literary features. Rhyme, rhythm, sound, okay? All which could be observed and therefore objective. So this is quite amazing concerning the Qur'an. This has been imitated, especially since it came down in the 7th century in Arabia, and those people who were living at that time were Arabic linguists par excellence. They were the best at expressing themselves in Arabic tongue because there was a socialization of Arabic at that age. You know, the famous historian Ibn Rashid, he says that the Arabs would celebrate two things at the time: the birth of a boy and when a poet rose amongst them. And it challenged them and they fell. And it's challenged humanity today, and no one has been able to exhaust, by the way, the finite letters, 28 letters, the finite grammatical rules and words in the classical tradition to produce the form of the Qur'an. This to me is a miracle. If it's a miracle, it must be from the divine. Now why is it a miracle? Because in the last few minutes, a miracle is not just a violation of natural law, that's an incoherent view of miracles. A miracle is an act of impossibility from the perspective of that you cannot have an adequate naturalistic explanation. Let me give you an example. The story of Moses and the staff in the Qur'an. Moses was told by God, throw down your staff. And the word became a snake. And it chased the Pharaoh and it ate the other illusory snakes of the magicians at the court of the Pharaoh. It's a famous story, biblical and non-biblical. That's an act of impossibility, because how can a piece of wood turn into an animal? And the wood itself has certain chemical structure, but the snake not only has carbon, which the wood has, but has additional things. So how can, from the limited chemical structure of the wood, create something that has additional molecules and chemical features, if you like, and attributes? This is impossible, because no one actually stood there and mixed and put some more chemicals in there, yeah? So there you go, there's the snake. No, that's why it's an act of impossibility, because the event, which is the snake, cannot be explained by the nature of the event, which is the wood. Because the wood was thrown and it became a snake. But the nature of the event, the wood, can't explain the snake. It's an act of impossibility, which requires us to look for supernatural explanations. And this is the same with the Arabic language, because the Qur'an is from the Arabic language, it's the nature of the Qur'an. But the miraculous event is the Quranic form, literary form. We go back to the nature of the Qur'an, which is the Arabic language. We exhaust all possible combinations, but we can't create its form. It's an act of impossibility. Therefore, it's a miracle. And that's just one example. There are many, many others. We have historical aspects that there are historical narratives and information in the Qur'an that transcends its time, and it goes against the whole aspect of borrowing the biblical narratives, because the Qur'an corrects the Bible in many ways, especially when you talk about Pharaoh and the king. Because if you see in history, from a biblical perspective, in the Torah, it mentions the leader of the Egyptians in one way. It's the Pharaoh, Fir'aun in Arabic. But the Qur'an has a differentiation. It says Pharaoh, Fir'aun, and Malik, king. And they're for two different periods. Malik was for the time of Joseph, Yusuf, alayhi salam, and Fir'aun was the time of Moses. Yeah, the time of Moses, alayhi salam, upon him be peace. And the two distinct periods. Now, interestingly, people thought the Qur'an was wrong, because the assumption was that, Christian Bible was right. But when we look at the hieroglyphs, because we've got the Rosetta Stone in the 19th or 20th century, and we're able to decode the pictorial language of the Egyptians at the time, and when we read the history, there was a change between the title of the leader of the Egyptians, from king to Pharaoh. And it was at those times, at the time of Yusuf, and at the time of Moses, then they start calling the leader Pharaoh. Do you see interesting? And oh, by the way, Hieroglyphs was a dead language at that time. It was dead. The historians did not know it. There was no access at that time. So the question is, how can the Qur'an know this? That information transcends the information of the time. There's many. We could talk about the Qur'an for hours. But the reason I wanted to mention this, just for you to investigate the Qur'an in a positive way, because it has reasons for its claims. These reasons are spiritual, the existential, about worship, about your life, about who you are, why you are, whose you are, but also the philosophical and rational, that we have an articulate case for the veracity of the Quranic discourse. And hopefully I've planted a few seeds today. I'm assuming we have Q&A. Thanks for your patience, guys.
Okay, so we have time for Q&A. If anybody has questions, please raise your hand. Yeah.
Hi, I you yourself come to Islam in this way, like this sort of thinking, assuming that you were not born Muslim.
Yeah, I wasn't born a Muslim. I was born a Greek. And now I'm a Greek Muslim, British Greek Muslim bloke. Yeah? So, I was brought up as like a secular humanist. How can you describe a secular humanist? I didn't really believe God has any particular say in my social political affairs, and humanism, I was supposed to go to the rule. Just don't treat others how you don't want to be treated, or treat others how you want to be treated as well. Obviously, humanism is bigger than that. If you want to go philosophically, you talk about the postmodern movement, science, technology. But the point is, I was brought up like that with a little bit of spiritualism, because my dad is like a New Age spiritualist. He believes in God, but he's very spiritual in his own way. So that was my upbringing. And the reason I became a Muslim was all of this. But to be honest, it's just intellectual gymnastics as well. It was a bit more than that. It was intuitively, I found it true. Intuitively. Also, I used to pray before I should pray. Like, I was praying before I was a Muslim. I found that quite profound. And it's such a natural set of activities to do, as if, your whole body mechanics was meant to do this. Yeah, that was your whole being. I liked a lot of the Islamic values, not all of them, but I liked some of the Islamic values at that time. What other reasons? I think it was generally coherent. There was a cumulative case for Islam. There wasn't just one argument. It was like, we have this, and you have the character of the Prophet, upon him be peace, then you have his history, then you have, could he be a liar? That's impossible. He must be speaking the truth. Then you have the Qur'an. Then you have, flawed explanations, naturalistic explanations for the emergence of this book. Then you have God's existence. The theology of Islam makes sense. I mean, Trinity baffled me. I thought it was incoherent practically, philosophically. Buddhism denies God, or doesn't have a say, keeps silent. In the whole concept of Tawheed, the oneness of the divine, which is a whole science in Islam. Tawheed meaning affirming the oneness of the divine is profound, it's so intuitive. And that's why we believe in Islam something called the fitrah. The fitrah is the innate disposition. The fitrah coming from the root word fatara, which you have words like fatrun and fatarahu, that God created something within you to acknowledge Him and worship Him. It's quite interesting because from Oxford University there was this anthropologist, I think it's Professor Bruce Hood and Olivia Petrovich. Anthropologists and social theorists said that if you took children on a desert island, even from atheist backgrounds, they would believe in God. It's interesting. This could be the innate disposition. Also, I believe strongly that the sanctification aspects of human beings is an instinct in psychology. There's some psychologists that are talking about this. To worship is an instinct. And you see this even in atheist China or Russia. You have massive statues of Stalin and Lenin. They've revered, almost worship and sanctify. You even have this amongst, popular culture. I mean, take, for instance, I'm going to be picking on the atheists, but I don't mean to, but, when we speak on the popular level, atheists would be like, well, Richard Dawkins said so. I mean, that's almost prophetic. It's like saying, well, the Prophet Muhammad said so. Have you read his book? Read it. Yeah? So do you see, it's like, this is almost like religious in nature as well. You see? So the point I'm trying to say is, there's a whole aspect of things why someone makes a decision. It's not just abstract and intellectual, because we're not intellectual robots. It's a lot of things. And I would even say the spirituality of Islam, based on its classical tradition, based on authentic sources, is very powerful. It's an amazing ethical tradition, especially if we look at things like economics. I think it has a correct geopolitical theory. As the Prophet Muhammad 1400 years ago said, upon him be peace, that the human being all he needs is food, shelter and clothing, which defines our limited needs and creates a philosophy of distribution rather than excessive competition. Capitalism, what is it based on? A geopolitical myth. Too many needs, not enough resources, so compete. You have excessive competition. And this is interesting because the number one problem in economics, in global economics, is what? The distribution of wealth. That's why you have 10 million people dying of obesity in America and millions of people dying in Somalia because of no food. It's got nothing to do with no resources, believe me. Just go to the sky and watch man versus food. Yeah? Yeah, you're smiling. But that's exactly the point. We have a great ethical tradition. And we could talk about Islamic economics. Actually, I'm not going to do that because you have an amazing thing called Tariq al-Diwani coming on Saturday, I believe. Yeah? Attend his talk. People should be Muslim just because of economics in Islam. How can a desert Arab, mending sheep and just trading, come up with an amazing economic model that would really solve the problems of global poverty today? That's a question that you're going to have answered on that talk. I know Tariq is an amazing brother, an amazing gentleman as well. And, I want to end this point on the statement of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, one of the caliphs of Islam. He made a statement. He said to his people, "Oh people, put wheat on the top of mountains so the people don't say that we kept the birds hungry." The birds. Imagine David Cameron being worried about if the birds were hungry or not. Unfortunately, he's worried about the 90,000 homeless people in this country. But at the time where the Islamic ethics was predominant, they were worried about the birds. Something to think about. So yeah, I hope that answers that question.
Discuss how you can rationally prove the existence of God. Well, where does that need faith?
Believe faith where faith should be. With the Christians, I'm kidding. The reason I'm saying this is because faith doesn't have an equivalent in the Arabic spiritual tradition, in the Islamic spiritual tradition. Iman is not faith. Iman is belief. Iman is the affirmation of the heart and the actions of the limbs, and Iman comes from the word to feel secure. It doesn't mean to believe in something without evidence. Because the Qur'an says, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ? Do you not use your intellect? We have even classical theologians like Ibn Taymiyyah, who wrote the book. There is no contradiction between the aql, the intellect, and the naql, the text, the revelation. You just have to have a sound aql salim. You have to have a sound aql, a sound intellect. It's in our tradition. We don't have this, just believe, that's the whole point of faith. And this is why we have to use the right language sometimes. Because when you talk to faith in a post-secular audience, they think, okay, it doesn't have any reasons to believe. But that's not right in the Islamic tradition. Like, obviously we believe in paradise and hell. And in the Qur'an narrative, the people of hell, what they'll be saying? If only we used our intellect. That's interesting. So, I don't know how to answer the question where faith lies, but we need to define our own language, I think. That's why sometimes I don't try and use the word religion for Islam. Religion, what do you think? Dogma, Sunday worship, that's it. But I like to use worldview. I think it's more comprehensive thinking, the oneness of God is a worldview for us, through which it's the prism and the filters through which we see our lives. And that affects our economic transactions, our personal transactions. That's the worldview. You see, language is very important. I think faith should be used when people understand what you mean by the word. But when you talk to a post-secular audience, say, yes, it's my faith, they think, okay, it makes him feel better. He has an issue. Yeah? But that's not necessarily true about Islam. Now, I'm not saying Islam is overly rational, it's not, there's a balance, but we have good reasons to believe. That's the point.
Yeah. Any further questions?
What would make someone who already feels that they're free want to look for essentially more freedom in believing in Islam?
Well, you just need to ask them the right questions, because sometimes we don't even know why we do things. you know, when I was reading about existentialism, which is very in line with Islamic Quranic questioning, I was like, oh no, that's so true. Why did I wear that? I did this in the office. I used to be a project manager. I used to work for the government and the police and stuff. And there was this PA. I mean, she used to wear the most highest high heel shoes ever. I mean, I wasn't judging her, yeah? But my God, you could see her feet was bleeding almost. Yeah? You know, you get those plasters in the back of the heels, yeah? And I'm like, why is she doing this? I'm quite a brave guy. I just say what I want to say, yeah? What's wrong with you? Why are you doing this? Oh, because I feel better about myself. I might ask your feet that question. Yeah? Why are you really doing that? And you know, we had a really serious conversation. She said, you know what? She took them off. You know, I'm doing it because people think, because that's what's maybe expected of me, or I'm only feeling better because I think that's what's expected from me. It's a social construct. So you're a slave to that. Do you see the point? Ask yourself the right question. Like one Canadian guy came up to me in Canada and said, I don't know, I'm totally happy. I said, because you've suspended the questions that you have to ask. Okay, have you asked this question before? I said, no. Ask it. And you commit suicide. I'm joking. No, it was an awful joke. That was an awful joke, I apologize. But the point I'm trying to say is, you know, then you start thinking. So I think it's all about questioning. And when you ask the right questions, you don't even have to give them answers. And the Qur'an is like that. It's open-ended, it's teleological, it's there for a specific end, because it's as if the divine writer knows if you ask these questions, you're going to come to a certain conclusion. So I think ask the right questions, you know. It's all existential. You know, the Qur'an says if you forget God, God is going to make you forget yourself. Because your identity is acknowledging and connecting with the divine. And you only know that when you've tasted it. I see that in my life. I get depressed when I'm away from Allah. Agitated, face twitches, you know? You just feel wrong about yourself. Your disposition is like, ugh. Yeah, honestly. Let's ask the right questions. That's all you have to do, ask the right questions. Make people think, feel, discuss. And I think if you ask the right question, then people will start thinking of, you know, why do they do things that they do? Why do I feel the way that I feel? Are we just a product of our society? Take Tibetan Buddhists, for example. I believe in the 1930s, they used to bury the newborns in freezing cold water. Now, I know about Tibetan Buddhists because I used to consider myself very interested in Buddhism. And I used to go to temples and read the Tibetan book of living and dying and read all the philosophy of mindfulness and compassion and meditation and all that stuff. Now, they're probably the most compassionate people you could ever meet. But they used to do that. Bury the newborns in freezing cold water, many will die. From our perspective, we think that's barbaric. We just haven't understood them. What is their social construct, their influence in their society? Is the philosophy of karma. And they say if it doesn't survive now, the Himalayan winter is gonna die anyway from the cold. You see, doesn't justify it, but you see how there's a construct that explains their behavior. You want people to question that, because sometimes we don't even question that. We don't question the things, well, you know, it's true, innit? It's the norm. It's self-evident. Because a lot of things that we think are true is just self-evident. But I don't think that's the case. We should discuss these things all the time. Take freedom of speech. By the way, I believe in freedom of speech, despite the misquotes in the media. Yeah? Freedom of speech, for example, people think you can say what you want, but you can't. Freedom of speech doesn't mean that. Go to any secular law, and there are an array of restrictions to freedom of speech. Libel law, hate speech law, can't say bomb on a crowded bus. What do you call it? You know, read John Stuart Mill when he talked about, you know, at that time they talked about the corn. There was in the 19th century, I think it was about the corn dealers, and people were like, he said you can't put a placard saying kill all the corn dealers, you know, because you're going to facilitate murder. Yeah, so you know, there's restrictions. But that's not popularized in the media, is it? But it's normal philosophical discourse. And interestingly, you know, saying this to like a local cabbie, he'd be like, oh, I never knew that, mate. Well, this is true. There's even product defamation laws, you know that? Amongst business. So the point is that to question that, you say, right, who has the right to draw the line and where? That's a powerful question. Who has ever asked that question? Nobody. Imagine if you do, you create a narrative. Do you feel powered, bro? It's fine, yeah. That's me. But that's true. Ask the right question. Even moral theory. Who has the right to draw the line away? Do we ever discuss that? We always believe it's a social consensus, or people coming together and making an agreement. Maybe we should start discussing who has the right to draw the line away. Who's the moral arbiter? If you ask these right questions, you get people to think. You don't even have to give them the answer. You see the point? The power, and power of questioning could change your own personality as well. If you always ask yourself in the morning, right, what do I want to do today to be more successful? What do I want to do today to be a more positive human being? No one's ever asked themselves that question. But if you really consciously ask yourself that question, you could change your life. Try it.
You have a question?
Well, I'm asking actually two questions. One, what does the heart actually play? Does the heart as a play actually play some role in this?
Yes.
I think that we use our minds actually to get the signs of God, but we perceive God by our heart.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
the second question is, what do you Greeks actually like philosophy?
Okay, the first question about the heart. Well, the heart in the Islamic, actually there is a difference of opinion about the role of the intellect and the heart. Is the intellect part of the heart, and nafs, question of soul, is that heart as well? There's a whole discussion, and I'm not qualified to answer that. But I can answer something which is the heart is the most important thing in Islamic spiritual and intellectual practice. God says in the Qur'an, no one's going to be saved in the day of judgment unless you come to him with qalbun salim, with a sound heart, with a pure heart. So we understand heart is very important, and it's actually our heart that acknowledges. And the intellect almost is like an avenue to engage with the heart. You see, it's not the end, it's the means. Now, why do I like philosophy? I don't like philosophy. I just like thinking. See, and the thing is, in Islamic discussion, people always think, oh, philosophy is very bad in Islam. Yeah? There is a bad philosophy as well. So your premise is not the Qur'an and the prophetic traditions. If your premise is away from the Qur'an and prophetic traditions, you have a dodgy philosophy, which we call ilm al-kalam, which we generally disagree with theoretical speculative discourse. Yeah? But if you have a good philosophy based on the prophetic traditions and the Qur'an, like Ibn Taymiyyah, there's a very good academic book that you should buy actually. It's by John Hoover, an academic, Professor John Hoover, published by Brill. It's an academic press. It's called Ibn Taymiyyah's Theodicy of Perpetual Optimism. I bought that book, which was £94 by the way. If you get a softback, about 30 quid. The back of the book, towards the end, he talks about the problem of evil. And Ibn Taymiyyah really laid the smackdown of the problem of evil, which I think Brother Adam Dean is going to talk about in a lecture. And Ibn Taymiyyah actually articulated a very primitive case hundreds of years ago, based on the Quranic and prophetic traditions, but he just used the philosophy language, but it's all based on the tradition itself. That's the type of philosophy I like. Take something from the Quran or the prophetic traditions and develop an argument, rather than just think about things from thin air, like, why is blue blue? Why is the floor the floor? Because it's the floor, man. Let's move on. What's the sound of one hand clapping? Actually, I was sent another thing on email the other day. It had a big picture of a man in the forest, and it's like this, yeah? A man in the forest, and it says a philosophical question. It says, if a man is alone in the forest, and there's no woman to hear him, is he still wrong? How many of you guys are married and know this answer? It's a joke, it's a joke. But anyway.
Did you have one question there? Yeah.
Yeah, so your argument on God's will was based or supported by Occam's razor.
No, that was his oneness. Sorry. His oneness was based on Occam's razor.
Yeah. So don't you think Occam's razor is just another assumption?
Yeah, of course it is. I agree.
Okay, so
But I mean, there's a bigger argument for God's oneness, but that was one of them. We didn't have time to articulate more arguments for his oneness. But I would argue, if there is something better as a principle, then offer it to us. Is this something better?
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So we stick with what's better, isn't it? And that's, I think, the most rational thing to do. And that's why, it's in line with Islamic philosophy, which basically says, don't override certainty with doubt. If there's like, you have a scale with all this evidence, and you have like a gram of doubt, and you have kilos of certainty. I mean, what, you're going to take the gram of doubt? That's an irrational human being. Even David Hume, the Scottish skeptic philosopher, he said the wise man just weighs the evidence. So me not knowing anything better than Occam's razor doesn't really deny my conclusion, unless someone brings something better. And I think remove the name Occam's razor. Call it, what's your name? Husnain's razor, yeah? Yeah? Husnain's razor. To call it anything, it's irrelevant. The point is, look at the principle. In the philosophy of conclusions, or if there's such a field, yeah? What is the better explanation? Is it one that doesn't explain everything and is very problematic, and is very complex, or is it one that's simple but yet explains most things? I would argue the simplest and the thing that is more coherent, explains most things, is the best explanation until we have evidence to prove otherwise. And that's a principle that's used in science, by the way. Because if we follow your line of thinking, if you mind me continuing your line of thought, you never have science, bro. Because it's equivalent of saying, for example, you know the best explanation? Does it have an explanation? Does the best explanation have an explanation? And does that explanation of the best explanation have an explanation? Wait. Forget Occam's razor. I need an explanation for the explanation of the explanation for the explanation for the best explanation. No. A damn Occam's razor. We need an explanation for the 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 explanation that explains the best explanation. If you keep on dabbing Occam's razor, you will never ever have an explanation. For example, what's the main premise of science? The real world is the real world, right? Prove it. You can never prove the real world is the real world. We live in the matrix. But it's true, you can never prove it. How do you know your brain is not in Mars and there's someone putting probes in it and making you feel and think the way that you do? It's an assumption that it's an axiom. Do you see? So, yeah, so even that line of thinking could even deny the whole of science. And which we know most of it is true because it works. And it's based on things like Occam's razor. All those type of principles. Do you see? Thank you.
Okay, that's all we have time for. Just 2 quick points. First, you have mini questionnaires. It would be grateful if you could take those through. And lastly, you also have the kind of itinerary of the week ahead and explore Islamic